Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Kim Mabon, and I am the board chair for the Corona Chamber of Commerce and owner of Creative by Design. We have some important updates ahead for you today. We appreciate you to join us. As all our weekly calls are informative, we continue to assist you in creating vision and bring a variety of speakers and topics. Today's event is sponsored by Vulcan Materials. With over 360 active facilities, Vulcan is the nation's largest producer of construction aggregates. They produce crushed stone, sand, gravel, asphalt, and ready mixed concrete. Vulcan's mission is to provide quality products and services which consistently meet the customers' expectations. Thank you, Vulcan Materials, for sponsoring this meeting. As a reminder, we want you to please use the chat button to ask any questions. Send your questions to the chamber host and we will verbally ask them at the appropriate time. Anthony, you need to mute. Okay. At this time, I'm going to give you a quick update on some events happening around Corona. So our next Good Morning Corona will be held on Friday, September 10th, where we will pay tribute to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We will also be honoring our Corona Police and Corona Fire Departments, showcasing their one firefighter and police officer of the year. Also coming up is Coffee with an Entrepreneur. And we're excited to announce that our September 13th Coffee with an Entrepreneur will feature guest speaker Marta Cortez. Marta is the general manager and co-owner of Eduardo's Mexican Restaurant, which has served the Corona area since 1994. Please register now to come hear her story at the Chamber on September 13th at 8 a.m. Also coming up is the Women's Leadership Conference on September 30th. This is a Riverside County event. It is our 10th annual event and will feature 10 10-minute talks from some very dynamic women. Riverside County Supervisor Karen Spiegel, who founded the event, will also share, and you don't want to miss the physicians panel. It will be held both in person and have a virtual option. We have sponsorship opportunities as well as exhibit booth space. Individual tickets are on sale now and the early bird pricing ends next Monday, August 31st, or Tuesday, August 31st, so make sure that you get those tickets now. All right, if you are a guest and not currently a member of the Corona Chamber, we welcome you to our chamber family, and meetings like these are just one of the many benefits to being a part of an active, thriving organization like the Corona Chamber. Please outreach to Robert Yanez and he can review the many incentives for both joining and referring other businesses to join. At this time, before we begin with our next segment, I'd like to share with you about those who are on the call today. On this call is former Assemblymember Jeff Miller, who is our chair for Advocacy Outreach. Also, Wendell Bugtie, representing Supervisor Karen Spiegel's office. Thank you for attending. At this time, we will shift to our advocacy segment where Legislative Advocate Jeff Gibson will share. Keeping a pulse on what's happening in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. can be a full-time job. With Jeff Gibson's thorough and complete research, he helps Corona Chamber to act timely on projects and initiatives that help make a difference in shaping our community. As owner of Occidental Communication Group, his knowledge of complex political issues and the great relationships he has built ensure the Corona Chamber has all the tools necessary to be effective on behalf of the business community. Please help me welcome Jeff Gibson to share a legislative update. Jeff?
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. So we have quite a lot to discuss today, and a lot of it has some very tough news to it. So let's just jump right in. So every year in about 2 months, we're going to start discussing the legislative platform. And Corona has one of the most thorough platforms of most chambers. And the reason we have that is so that we can take positions on pieces of legislation or speak to pieces of legislation as people reach out to us without taking a specific position on the legislation. And one of the areas that we deal with regularly is housing policy. We don't come to you about housing policy oftentimes because we're an employer-based group, but housing policy affects a huge amount of what you do. It affects the values that are held within your community. It affects the transportation corridors that you use. It affects all of the fire and police resources that are used. And so it's something that we keep very close track of. We work with legislators on a very regular basis. And so, but there are some major pieces of legislation that are moving this year that have not moved in previous years. And so, and it's the interesting piece of this are that the opponents and the proponents are the same this year. The reasoning is the same this year, but the bills are moving this year. So this is going to be something that we have to deal with on a very regular basis going forward. So on our first slide here, we discuss two pieces of legislation that you're going to be hearing a lot about, SB 9 and SB 10. Both of these have essentially passed the legislature. They need to, in the case of SB 9, it needs to be taken up on the floor. And on SB 10, it passed out of the legislature by one vote. Assemblymember Cervantes had no vote recorded on it, but it passed on a 41-9 vote after the city of Los Angeles came out and opposed the bill, because what it allows property owners to do, resident property owners to do, is that you could subdivide your property. So say you have a Corona-sized piece of property, and your neighbor decides to put a what's known as an additional dwelling unit, an ADU. Everybody who's been on this call for more than 2 or 3 times knows I hate government acronyms, just because they keep people that don't have time to contemplate government acronyms out of the conversation. So if you think traditionally, it would be called a granny unit. It would be about 800 square feet. Well, under governor's policy, you're allowed to put one in on your property no matter where you live. So if you put one on now, under SB 9, you could now split your property into 2 pieces. And and your local planning agency, which previously would say, okay, you're putting in a new dwelling, so therefore you need 2 or 3 parking spaces, you need to pay freeway impact fees, you need to pay all of these other impact fees. The owner can come in and say, no, I don't. I have 2 pieces of property. All I need to show is that I have 2 parking, that is that I have 1 parking space nearby. And then you could put, hold on for it, another 2 units, because you could put additional dwelling units on that piece of property, and you could split it again. And so where currently you would have a backyard and a driveway, you can have up to 6 units of housing in what is known as a single family residential zone. And up in Sacramento, single family residential zones have fallen out of favor, and they like to pretend that they're exclusionary. But what the pieces of the puzzle, and Jeff Miller can sing chapter and verse on this, is zoning code for the last 100 years has been enforced from Sacramento. And cities have received transportation money, water, their tax dollars back for water infrastructure, for traffic infrastructure, for all sorts of different, for fire infrastructure. All of these infrastructure decisions that keep the level and quality of and safety of our life is based upon zoning, the rules of which are highly regulated by the state. Highly regulated by the state. Now the state is coming in and saying, we don't like those regulations so much. So single family zoning doesn't mean what it means anymore. So from a homeowner perspective, from a community perspective, you and your neighbors may look at that and go, wait a second, we made the biggest financial transaction of our life in determining where to live, and now you're changing the rules. That's the argument that's being, another argument would be, we all agreed we need to leave Afghanistan. What's the problem? Just to pull something out of the air. This is the type of argument that Sacramento is making. Of, we all knew we needed housing, and for 80 years we've been telling cities to charge developers and to charge families based on single family zoning, but we don't want people to own their own home, So in the middle of your home, middle of your community, you could now have 6 units of housing that are all designed to be secondary housing. So they may say, instead of having a actual concrete slab like your house does, it would have subflooring, because it's designed to basically be a shack in the back that could serve as either a pool cabana or a yard. You could put yard equipment in it, or in a pinch, you could put a family member in it if they needed a place to stay for a couple of weeks. Well, now they can stay there permanently. And doesn't have to be plumbed, doesn't have to, right? All of the different very high standards that everyone agrees make Corona, make all of our communities, and that are highly, highly regulated. You can't put PVC pipe into a California home, but you could put a California home without any pipes at all in your backyard. This is what we're coming down to, and we're pretending that these are going to be quality homes, and they're not. SB 9 is sponsored by the Senate President Pro Tem, Toni Atkins, and she has taken all of the criticism that the people that are going to be hurt by this most are minority homeowners in very crowded neighborhoods that are crowded anyway, that are being targeted by corporations, very, very large. The world's largest corporation owns the more single family residences in California than any other homeowner. And with the idea that, hey, we own 3 in a row. If we knock down these 3, we could put in, say, 50 units of apartments, and the city would only be required to ask us for 50 parking spaces. And where under the current structure of ideas, they'd have to go, there'd be a zoning process, there'd be a planning process, you'd have to show 150 parking spaces, you'd have to pay for freeway congestion, you'd have to pay for all of these items. So it's a very, very difficult situation that we're in. SB 10, which has passed both houses. Assemblymember Cervantes had no vote recorded. And that bill passed 41-9 in the Assembly. It now goes back for what's known as concurrence in the state Senate, and then it will go on to the governor. So it's important that you get out there and say, we want quality housing in Corona. And there are places in Corona to rethink industrial areas, rethink commercial areas, but they must go through the local planning process. And they must pay their fair share. They must pay for traffic impacts. They must pay for water impacts. They must pay for all of these other impacts. And these must be real homes. They can't be just subflooring over dirt in the backyard that very well could be a kid's playhouse on a Tuesday, and you could rent it out on a Wednesday. So, and the reason I use that as an example is that's precisely the house in Long Beach that the governor stood in front of and issued his emergency order allowing every California homeowner to put an ADU in the back. He didn't even realize he was standing on subflooring, that there wasn't any concrete underneath it or any plumbing. So in any case, I'm happy to take any questions about that or move on to some victories that we've had in this area.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Mike Rashi. Just curious, is this ADU, what was the reason behind creating this? ADU is to address the issues, housing issues, or what was the reason?
So the governor, as you remember, Mike, set out for building 3.5 million homes in the state of California during his 2-year two terms. So he said in 8 years, we're going to have 3.5 million homes. And if you remember, by the time we left Sacramento in 2019, because he announced it when we were there. And this is why it's so important when we do go back to Sacramento that everybody joins. But during that trip, he started with 3.5 million. By the time we left, it was 1.8. By the time we got off the plane, it was 1.3. And I'm not making a joke. I know I normally make some jokes here, try and lighten up, but that is not a joke. That is how quickly it went to 1.3. Well, it ended up that someone in his staff did some easy math on what is available regular land to develop on and came up with that you could build 400,000 homes. So they said, okay, well, then let's look at existing areas and start requiring that one of the most controversial local items are ADUs, specifically because an additional dwelling unit in your backyard disrupts the zoning and all of the state requirements on the city. When you want to build a single family home, and I know if anybody's ever gone to the planning departments at your city, you have a very unpleasant experience generally. Or if you have a pleasant experience, it's a very slow experience. Well, the reason is because there literally are thousands of pages of forms that the city must follow, or it could be sued for what you're proposing to do. So as much as we like to beat up on the city from time to time, in reality, they're following these very specific guidelines. Well, ADUs, while it doesn't seem much, my grandmother needs a place to stay for the last 3 years of her life. We want to take care of her and we want her to have her own front door. So we're going to take our kids' playhouse out in the back and we're going to make it a little bit more friendly and put an air conditioning unit in it for her to make her happy. Okay, well, but when they built your home, it had a specific number of parking spaces required. It had a specific number of other requirements. If you add more people to that piece of property, you're now in violation of all of those ideas. Your lot line adjustments, all of these different pieces of the puzzle. And so that's where the ADU problem came in. Sacramento is looking at this as an end run on having to come up with big things like new freeways, like new transit corridors, because they can just say to the city, well, we gave you the ability to build them in backyards and you didn't. Okay, well, there's a reason for that, because the roads are in horrible condition. You can't guarantee the quality in Huntington Beach. They can't guarantee the quality of the pipes because of this ADU system that is allowing people to develop housing without paying their plumbing fee. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you for all the detail. However, being a devil's advocate, I'm looking at a different angle, and I agree with you 100%. But if somebody does have an issue for putting their grandparents or the parents in close to them to take care of them, to look after them, maybe this would be a good thing. But I can see easily how people can take advantage of this and start another kind of business in there.
There's already a huge amount of capability within a city to plan and move an ADU unit much easier than a regular unit. And it does go on a case-by-case basis. And it is designed specifically within state code. This is what state legislators want you to believe, that this is the first time in a generation California is considering housing policy. No, it's not. Every single governor has gone through in housing policy, in adding units in uncreative ways is an easy way for Sacramento to kind of wrap it up in a bow and say, well, you don't want to help people that have a sick parent? You don't want to help people? Okay. Well, yeah. So I understand the devil's advocate, but yeah, that's all of the things that you just discussed are already in code. So that's
awesome. Thank you for the clarification, Jeff.
Okay, so going on to the next slide, we'll pick up on anything we missed. So we've had two big wins in this process. And as we've discussed before, and it's on slide 3, and we'll discuss in a second, with legislative deadlines coming up, August is a very busy month for people like me that wear ties on Zoom calls, and as opposed to Leonard Skinner t-shirts. Just to point someone out. So yeah, you're retired from the legislature, but not insurance. He's a great insurance agent. Keeps my kids healthy. So
So the legislature has decided not to pursue two bills this year, SB 6 and SB 478. SB 6 is one of the toughest bills I have ever seen for local planning authority. The state of California is very specific on how cities can pay for their services, and commercial zones are absolutely key to how cities are able to pay for the services that we rely on. And what SB 6 would allow for almost every commercial zone is that a developer would be able to decide that they wanted to develop a multi-unit residential area on a commercial zone, and as long as it's not adjacent to an industrial zone, right? So there isn't somebody that's making something or plating something or cleaning something adjacent to the property. So think of your local strip mall, that if a local strip mall isn't working out and we drive by and go, oh man, I wish somebody would do something about that. Well, SB 6 would allow somebody to do something about that, like put 36 units on top of where the 7-Eleven is. And again, that is a policy disaster. In Huntington Beach, again, there's a state appellate court case that's going on where a liquor store is being replaced on a very small strip of land, 25 feet wide, is proposed to be replaced by 48 condos. It has a ingress and egress, so you can only enter and leave through a common one. So up to 96 people could live in a location that has one driveway, where you could only have a right turn. So you would have to make a left turn across Beach Boulevard if you wanted to make a left out of the complex. And the state of California is suing Huntington Beach and the Orange County Fire Authority because they would not permit that housing project because there's no capability for a fire unit or an emergency unit to get in. So these are the battles that we're trying to face, where you're looking at it going, well, it might work better if this commercial land becomes a residential center, and we have a great process for that already. It's called the local zoning process, and it was set up by the California State Legislature starting in the 1920s. And so that's the process that if we don't like it, reform the zoning process, just say, well, it doesn't apply if you have the project. So that's our point. SB 6 has stalled in the assembly and will likely not be considered the rest of the year. SB 478 is something very similar. SB 478 basically says that it starts a precedent of a city can set up a zone, but it cannot regulate what happens within that zone. And for everybody who hasn't thought about this before, you look at an area of your town and you say, this is where we want, as a community, we want commercial property. And then, but that's not our only opinion. We want the big mall to be over by the freeway, and we want the dry cleaner to be here. This is how you actually structure a community so that you can get home within 50 minutes of getting off the freeway. What SB 478 proposes is, no, you can't do that. You still have to follow all the state guidelines for zoning and for all of your other responsibilities. But if you want to build multi-unit housing within a multi-unit zone, then it's up to the developer about how they want to do this. So, I mean, it's ludicrous. It's another example of a set of saying that there's too many rules, so let's make new rules that build loopholes instead of let's go back and reform the rules so that everybody can understand them in plain English. Which, by the way, is a paraphrase of Thomas Jefferson. So, going on to the major deadlines real quick, Anthony, because we're getting close on time, and we have another big piece. August 27th. So Friday this week, any bill that is not out of policy committee becomes a 2-year bill, which is what we're hoping for on a number of our pieces of legislation that are still active. We have had a very good year in terms of beating back legislation, but we are hoping for a couple more good days on that. Monday of next week, August 30th, all other legislative activity it ends, and between August 30th and September 10th, the legislature just votes on bills and has floor debate, which basically at this point, most floor debate is going to be voting. So you're not going to get a huge amount of floor debate. September 13th, all legislation needs to be passed as the legislature ends. September 14th is the recall. All of you should have received your ballots at this point. And if you have not, then you should get into contact with your local county supervisor, Karen Spiegel's office. They can assist you in referring you to the county registrar and to help track that down. There will also be in-person voting. You can also go to voteinfo.net, which is the Riverside County Registrar of Voters as well. October 10th is the last and final day for the governor to sign legislation. So between now and October 10th, we're going to be very busy on legislative issues. Last slide is, as of yesterday, the federal government, the House passed and was lauded by the president and most of the press for passing a $3.5 trillion budget allocation. Well, the $3.5 trillion has very little in it other than notes saying we agree as a majority that in the House that we want to spend $3.5 trillion on traditional budget categories. So when added with the $3 trillion in unspent COVID funds, which if you remember, we had 3 rounds of COVID funds that were desperately needed by all of us on this call and every American and everyone with a face. But that added up to over $9 trillion, but it ended up that we've only spent 6. So instead of putting the $3 trillion, and since it's all deficit spending, instead of not taking out the loan for the $3 trillion, we've already sold the debt. So it's on the books and we have the ability to spend it. So that the Congress is deciding that they want to spend that this year. They're keeping that on top of it, on top of the $3.5 trillion. On top of that, you have the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And then on top of that, you have the proposed $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. So if all of those bills pass, and all of those bills are set to pass, you are looking at $10 to $11 trillion in spending. As you can tell from this chart, we were at a level of about $4.7 trillion in annual spending in 2019. And you can see that what you have here is what's known as a classic hockey stick type of spending allocation. During the times of the largest spikes in those spending allocations, you had something that, and I apologize to anybody under 40 on this call, if there are any, there was something called inflation. It destroys wealth. It destroys capital. It destroys investment. And as we all agreed, all parties, everyone involved who was alive in 1982, agreed that one of the chief reasons for inflation, in fact, the chief reason, was a doubling of the federal outlays over the period of time that inflation started and inflation ended, which pretty much put us on a path of trying to spur economic growth without and keeping the growth of the American government in line with economic growth. As you can see in the out years there, how there was a spike up and a spike down, and a spike up and a spike down. Well, now you can see the blue line and the red line, which are receipts and outlays, have greatly outpaced each other, and that's the path that we're on. So we're tracking this. When we have more specificity from the federal government, from the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee, which is headed by Senator Bernie Sanders, for all of you who'd like to know who the chairman of things are, we will be getting that to you. So opening up questions. Or have I stunned everyone into silence?
Thank you, Jeff. Anthony, do we have questions? You're muted.
Sorry about that. We do have just a few quick questions regarding SB 9 and SB 10. If these bills pass, can our city elected officials override the state rules? And also regarding the city, do they have a position on these housing bills? If we don't know, can we find out?
So I believe the city of Corona is opposed to SB 10. I do not know their position on SB 9. I will get that back to the group. And we can find that out fairly quickly. The only way that they could override is through a lawsuit, and lawsuits are taken up in state court by judges who are very closely connected to legislators, usually in the majority party, and appointed by the governor generally. So if you're looking to a court, like I just described to you, to easily overturn a state policy, you're looking for a judge that isn't interested in becoming an appellate court judge, for instance, which would require Senate confirmation. So you're not always going to get the judge to agree with you. In Huntington Beach, there was a judge that agreed with the city, wrote a very thoughtful argument based upon the findings of local officials, and the state responded with that by referring the judge to a judicial performance review and suing again in the appellate court. So that definitely sends a message to everybody interested in opposing what the state is doing. So I'm looking at the people that are opposed to SB 9, and hold on. Corona is not on there. But so I will reach out to the city as well and see if they were paying attention to that. So because there is a lot going through, but a number of groups that City of Menifee is opposed, and a number of other groups that the City of Corona is a part of are opposed to that. So it's very likely that they're using those as part of their position.
Thank you, Jeff. And then one last quick question. Do you know if there is a height limit on these structures?
The height limits would go to the normal city standard, unless they qualified for other state programs, which does allow them for bonuses. Whenever I have seen these projects go in, generally they are engineered to take advantage of as many state bonuses as possible. So yeah, you're gonna be receiving 30-foot. They're going to be going. They do not have to pay attention to lot lines when you're dealing with ADUs. They can go zero lot line, so you could have the wall that you share with your neighbor end up being a common wall with a actual dwelling unit. So and with all the problems that go along with those types of items. So there's a number of different challenges. So we are going to keep you up to speed on that.
Thank you, Jeff. There are no further questions, so I will pass it right on to Kim.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
And thank you, Jeff Gibson, for doing a heavy dive into these important issues. You will see in the chat box that our advocacy chair, Jeff Miller, stated just how important these issues are. And the Corona Chamber will continue to follow up on these and bring you up to date on them. Again, thank you, Jeff Miller and Wendell Bugtie, for being on the call, as I mentioned earlier. And we're also happy to share that former Mayor Jason Scott and Citizen of the Year, and Yolanda Carrillo, a former city council member, are on the call as well. We were also joined by Corona Police Chief Robert Newman and Corona Fire Chief Brian Young. But we are grateful for every single person on this call, and we thank you for taking your time today. As Jeff mentioned, please reach out to your local representatives, Assembly Member Sabrina Cervantes and Senator Richard Roth, both of whose contact information is provided on your screen. Once again, we'd like to thank today's sponsor, Vulcan Materials Company. They strive to be responsible stewards with respect to the safety and environmental impact of their operations and products. Learn more at vulcanmaterials.com. If you would like to sponsor a future business briefing, please contact the Chamber. Register now to join us for next Wednesday, September 1st, for more advocacy news. Thank you everyone for attending. Our meeting is adjourned.